Hey guys, welcome back to Real Housewives Recaps. I am so glad you're here. We're picking right back up with this book, which I'm loving so much. If you're reading along with me, we are smack dab into chapter 8, around page 234. All right, so as you recall, we left off with that fateful night at Royal Albert Hall. Remember? Where they tell fanciful stories on Oprah and how Meghan was allegedly attempting to unalive, right? All right, real talk. This is a sensitive subject, so I get it. I feel weird talking about it too. I'm just going to give you my opinions. I've stated it before. I don't buy it. I find it all too convenient that she's finding similarities with what Diana was going through. Diana famously talks about similar feelings when she was expecting Prince William, and we know the story about the stairs and stuff. So it's interesting to me that Meghan, who loves to have her name in the same sentence as Diana, would do something like that. I'll leave it there, but you know what I'm saying. I don't believe it. I believe that it was an attempt to draw attention to herself because that's her favorite thing to do. I believe that Harry believed it, and it's not that I'm pro-Harry. I'm absolutely not. That guy sucks. But it is interesting. Look at the difference in their faces here. And yeah, I hear you. I play devil's advocate all the time, and I think, well, I myself suffer from anxiety, and I know what it's like to put on a shiny, happy face when you feel the opposite inside. But I'm sorry, she's just not that good of an actress. She's not. She is beaming in these photos, and Harry looks like he is struggling. So Lady C had put out in the last part of the book that I read about her theory is, interesting timing because people were starting to suspect. Again, I'm just focusing on the updated parts of this book. There's so much to the book. It's a wonderful book. Pick it up. I recommend it highly. But I'm trying to pick up on the newer parts because I've already recapped the original book. So the newer parts are going into behind the scenes. People were suspecting, things are weird with them. Could this be some sort of pillow under her dress? We don't know. Something made a pop noise. Weird, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. What's going on? So it's crazy. We have to dance around this, but we do. All right. So this could be a big look over here. You know what I mean? Like a attempt to get our attention elsewhere. I think that's an interesting theory that I really hadn't thought of. I tend to think it's more, look at me, her favorite game to play, right? But Lady C then goes into how it just doesn't make sense. Their claims on Oprah that the following day, Harry had gone, and you remember the story, spoken to somebody in HR. Well, again, Lady C rightly points out this just doesn't sit well with the realities of the way that the palace functions. So HR itself, it exists for the benefit of the employees, not the royal family. I thought that was such an interesting point. I didn't even think about it like that, But that's such an interesting point. But let's play devil's advocate and say, okay, it's there for everybody. I doubt it, but let's just pretend. Okay. She goes on to point out it just can't deal with matters concerning the family's health or well-being. That's not what it's there for. And Harry and Meghan should have known this. Harry was bragging about having his therapist on his speed dial. Something I'm shouting into the mic. I need to calm down. But something I've pointed out a million times, and I know you guys have too. Isn't Doria a mental health, into mental health stuff as well? Isn't she? I don't care about her, but isn't she involved in that stuff? So you're telling me Harry couldn't help her. Her mother couldn't help her. Their only choice was to go to Palace HR, according to them. And they were afraid that they would embarrass the palace. It just doesn't add up at all. And let's pretend like all of that is true. At that point, don't you say F it and say, I don't care if you're embarrassed. My wife needs help. We're going to a doctor. You're not held prisoner. It doesn't make any sense. But Lady C is putting out this theory that I love, which is this is nothing but an attempt to lay a paper trail of showing how, look, they wouldn't help us. We tried everything. They were mean to us. We're victims, right? We've seen that over and over and over and over and over again. But the point that I love that Lady C makes is that, she was doing all this to try to discredit the family, but who did she discredit? She discredited herself and her idiot husband. I added that, not Lady C, but that's basically what she did, because they're putting out that they went to HR for medical help when she has access to the best doctors in the entire world. 2 days before, Harry had gone to a meeting about mental health with the Royal Foundation, of which he was a head of. He had his own therapist on speed dial. I talked about that. He confirmed it in Spare. But then, again, I know, I'm trying to make sense out of something that doesn't make any sense. Remember in Spare, he said that's the first one he called when William broke his necklace or threw him into a dog bowl, whatever he said. That book is, oh God, it made my brain go into mush. Anyway, he said he was the first one he called, but yet when his wife, according to them, was really struggling with serious issues, he doesn't think to call him. It just doesn't make any sense. Sounds like, again, I'm in agreement with Lady C that they were trying to build a case against the royal family and show negligence of some sort. Okay, this is where things get interesting. I never read Finding Freedom. Did you guys? I just couldn't. I made myself read that other Omid book, and my brain's turned to mush. I was banging my head against the keyboard. I'm surprised I could form sentences when reading Endgame. But anyway, she points out that in Finding Freedom, by Omid, of course, as well as Carolyn Durand, it was published in 2020. And apparently in that book, they put in a name for her obstetrician, which is interesting because remember, that was their whole thing. They wouldn't put any names of any doctors, which flies in the face of royal tradition because they always have physicians sign off and people that were there for the birth sign off. They're like, no, we want privacy. Nah. Except for we want to cling on to these titles too. I'm feeling very childish today. Anyway, so according to her in the book, they actually named her obstetrician. The Lady C says she's the second and now ex-wife of an earl whom Lady C has known for 50 years. She was told by a mutual friend that he was furious that his then wife's name had been mentioned. He was quoted as having said that they weren't even in the country at the time of the baby's birth. So then Lady C, and I have to point this out, says this is a matter of sensitivity. Because husbands of doctors, you have to be careful with HIPAA and all that. But he is allowed to say that they were doing a joint activity. Like, I think it was something like skiing or something. I think they said that they were doing. So by him putting that out there, he's allowed to put that out there. We were skiing, but I'm saying skiing. I can't remember what the activity was. Whatever they were doing, he basically had an alibi and was speaking out about it. And but of course, you know how Harry and Meghan are. You have to be the doctors are bound by confidentiality, and you can't say whether or not somebody is a patient without specific consent from the individual. So let me break this down because I'm sure the laws are different everywhere. So you can claim anybody's your doctor, and the doctor can't say they're not a patient of mine because of confidentiality. This is according to Lady C. I really haven't given this topic some thought, but that is interesting if that's the case. Because then I think of all those celebrity articles that I read where it's like, hey, did so-and-so have a nose job? And then it'll be like, Dr. So-and-so who does not treat the celebrity seems to think so. So there must be loopholes. I don't care. I just find that very interesting that he was saying, no, we were elsewhere, but yet the doctor can't, she can't speak up. So just let that sink in because I'm obsessed with this idea. This is a hypothetical. We don't know. There's no way to confirm it. But let's just pretend like this is the case and play the hypothetical game. So she potentially picked a random doctor, named her as her doctor in this book, or Omid did, named her as a random doctor in this book banking on the fact that the doctor would be held to a confidentiality or a HIPAA, whatever, agreement that the doctor can't confirm her as a patient. Isn't that wild? If that's the case, that adds a new level of psycho to this already batshit crazy situation. Oh, but don't you worry, the crazy is continuing. So according to Harry and Meghan's, well, to quote Lady C, later recollections, so after this, this foray into seeking help from the cold and mean palace, it wouldn't help her. I just don't believe it. Anyway, they, according to them, they demanded that the palace authorities and that his family, including Her Majesty the late Queen, help protect Meghan from the press. So this is where Lady C steps in and says, well, I'm told, Lady C is told that what it really was is to get the family to help stop the press. It's more about muzzling them so that way he could silence them. Maybe this is where I'm guessing. She didn't specifically say this. This is my opinion. I'm wondering if it ties back to the baby bump, to get them to make sure they can't write about the baby bump, right? Lady C posits that it's more about you can't write anything about Meghan unless it's positive stuff. Okay. In Spare, Harry says just enough to make it clear that he nobbled even his father, who called him darling boy, while telling him you can't take on the press. You can't win against them. So again, I thought this was so interesting. Harry making them himself, everybody involved, well, the two of them, victims in all this against the big bad family that wouldn't protect him against the press. But even since away from the family, while still using the titles, we see this. They're still actively, they always try to suppress the First Amendment. They can't stand it if people speak about them. And it's just, I'll never stop talking about how crazy that is. And how wild that those two who speak up about everything want to silence anybody else from having an opinion or speaking up about them. Lady C goes on to explain Harry wasn't being truthful. Shocker. When are they ever, either of them? And didn't tell them, hey, it was about a possible bump speculation. It was more, he was spinning it as they felt they needed protection against, stories about Meghan being difficult. Well, I don't know. Here's an idea. Don't be difficult. Don't be a dick to your employees or the people working with you that are there to help you. And, people probably won't talk about that as much. Just an idea. But here's the point that I want to underline in this part of the book that had me completely riveted. Okay. So Harry and Meghan have spun this as the press was evil and fixated on them and writing terrible stories. But Lady C is pointing out, no, think about it. The press were being unbelievably kind to them by not reporting on the suspicion of an alleged possible baby bump situation or moon bump or whatever you want to call it, right? They were actually being really nice about it. They thought that it was so incredible, the story, according to Lacey, that the press thought the story was so incredible, not in a good way, in a crazy way, that they refused to report on it. But there was talk amongst the journalists, according to her, that basically the whole situation was so enormous and improbable that the standard reaction, which Lady C attests to, because she says she experienced it herself, is one that discounted it because it's just too unbelievable. And I'm saying the same thing on this idea of the doctor thing, picking a doctor, saying she's your doctor because there's HIPAA rules for privacy, and they just bank on that the doctor won't speak up. Again, if that's what happened, it's so incredible and it's so crazy that most people have trouble thinking, because why would anybody do that? That you think, well, there's no way. And I think people that haven't done their homework on Harry and Meghan and seeing how they operate over and over and over again, I think that's what happens to a lot of them. If they're not drinking the sounded southern, drinking the Meghan Kool-Aid, then it just sounds unbelievable. And I know I've talked to people and explained it, and I sound like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat. But it is so unbelievable how these two operate. It keeps me fascinated. So with all of this and all this moon bump stuff, she said that journalists were suspicious, but it was so nuts that they didn't even know how to ask about it. And she does posit that there was speculation among like Samantha Cohen and others like, there is something there, and they're fighting pretty hard to have the press stop talking about them. What's going on? They assumed it was to do with Meghan's behavior and with, you remember when they were trying to merch everything? You remember how they're still trying to do that? Yeah, they thought it had something to do with that. Well, Lady C said basically the safest option for the palace at the time was just bury your heads in the sand. So, okay. Then she goes on, Lady C, to talk about this. I thought this was so interesting. She posits, okay, Meghan is so into mischievousness, to quote Lady C, and eccentricities that she wouldn't, like, she throws out another theory. What if Meghan, don't kill the messenger here. This is Lady C's idea. I just think this is interesting. What if Meghan was pregnant, but she added extra padding, shall we say, to increase her girth to cause speculation? Now, Lady C says, now, I don't know that I believe it either, but the palace was convinced, of course, that Meghan was a, quote, attention-seeking, publicity-hungry mischief maker. So the suspicion was that she was perfectly capable of pulling off all sorts of tricks to lead the public to think that black was white, and thereby not only keeping herself more prominently in the news than she would otherwise be, but also manufacturing a mystery. Ding, ding, ding. That's what they love to do. Lady C goes on to say one of my favorite things. She was so conniving and so intent on being portrayed a victim of callous institution, i.e. the royal family, that she might as well be inviting speculation as to whether she was actually pregnant while actually being pregnant, so that she could then prove them all wrong and thereby make the palace and press look stupid. That's an interesting theory. I see what Lady C is doing there, playing devil's advocate. I know which camp I'm in, and it's not this one. I don't think there's a real bump with a fake bump over top. But you know what? They have done such bizarre things at every turn. Nothing would shock me at this point. Nothing. Okay, so then in a further update to the book, Lady C points out it's interesting that Harry's eagerness to control the internet via that Aspen group that he's part of, it interestingly only seemed to arise after the question about Meghan's pregnancies became topical. Since his obsessions are only ever triggered by his personal experiences, it's safe to assume there's a link between the two facts, according to Lady C. And I love that, and that actually makes so much sense to me. In my opinion, both could be true. They could be trying to silence people, speculating about a bump. I've seen that. That seems to be the thing that gets them to go after YouTubers. But also anybody that, I don't know, has a differing opinion of them, they try to silence, or points out how awful they are, they try to silence. Again, just like their followers. And then on page 241, one of my favorites, Lady C goes on to point out, despite the decades that Meghan has spent, quote, acting up a storm, she's not a good actress. And moreover, royalty doesn't act. Goes on to explain that with Meghan, people just find her manipulative. And when a public figure is so busy relaying an underlying message the way that Meghan does, people are made to feel that they're being railroaded. And I think I think she's spot on. That's exactly it. So they tend to rebel against that person's message. So Lady C points out that with royalty as well as aristocracy, that they're brought up to be authentic, to avoid manipulativeness, to be forthright, or at least bland, rather than hypocritical, even to be considered rude rather than false. So that way you're avoiding acting, but you you have to behave authentically even when you're not behaving properly. Well, Harry and Meghan missed that message because that's all they know how to do is be inauthentic and hypocritical. Then she goes back into that mysterious bump and how according to Lady C, it's changing sizes. We've talked about the same. Isn't that interesting? The bump changed size quite a bit. And it's interesting when people put side-by-side dates of the size of the bump, and they just don't make sense. And then a male journalist told Lady C, quote, "The reason she's always clutching the bump is because she needs to keep it in place." Interesting. That's what I've said as well. There's a difference of lovingly, gently resting your hand on a bump and holding it up. Isn't that odd? And Lady C, I love this part. Again, let's see, page 245 goes on to explain that the mainstream public were picking up on some of the weirdness going on with this bump and points out, quote, "She isn't even a good actress." Someone who attended a wedding at Lady C's castle told her, "If you've seen Suits, you've seen the act. Sometimes she's acting out a scene from one episode, sometimes another. There's nothing real about that woman." I find that so funny. I've said the same. She cannot act. But I didn't even think about acting out scenes from Suits. I hope I'm taking this very literally and I'm laughing my ass off and hope that that's the case because, oh man, that's too funny. More weirdnesses are happening when she's supposed to be very pregnant, a lot of bending down that we've discussed, balancing in very high heels. It's not that it can't be done. It's just interesting the way Meghan went about these activities that people were beginning to notice. But again, Lady C makes the very astute point that, they go on, Harry and Meghan, to whine about the press and how unfairly they were treated but it was actually the opposite. The press did them a huge favor, and while they were speculating behind the scenes, it sounds like, of course, nobody was publishing this. And to this day, mainstream media doesn't talk about this. So the other funny thing happening during this time is they were demanding more privacy for themselves, the ones that reveal everything real and made up about everybody else. Yeah, those two. And were being very secretive about where the baby would be born and doctors and all the stuff we've talked about. Okay. While they're demanding privacy. I just find that so, we want privacy. If it cracks me up, that's the sugar go-to as well, as they never said they want privacy. Oh, yes, they did. They may not have used the words, "we want privacy," but they did because they wouldn't tell any of the details about the birth. And while I am the number one person to say kids are off limits, they deserve privacy, this is something different when we're talking about the line of succession. That's what makes it so weird and so shady. They demand all the perks with no responsibilities. Lady C points out by demanding such privacy, what they did was they ignited this suspicion because of their secretiveness, and demands for such extreme degree of privacy. Basically, it lit the internet on fire, as it would, right? With speculation regarding the impending birth. Which Lady C asked the question, were they protecting their privacy or themselves against the possibility of exposure with all this? Page 254, she straight up says Meghan and Harry had done everything possible to increase the speculation that they'd be passing off, quote, a surrogate's offspring as Meghan's own. So Lady C kind of explains at this point the palace was really struggling with those two, that they were used to Harry and Meghan being, quote, unreasonable and childishly self-indulgent, and they're both prone to being that. And that the crazies on the internet were whipping up conspiracy theories out of nothing. But again, we know this, but in case you're new here and you don't, it's worth talking about. Lady C explains that there's motivation for all this. There's a necessity of secrecy because in the event that a surrogate was being used, no royal baby born of surrogacy could be in the line of succession or legally acknowledged as a legitimate member of the royal family. If Meghan were unable to carry children, and she and Harry had been able to use his sperm and her egg, and she smarted at the injustice of her child being excluded from the line of succession because of the law. And then Lady C takes a big old dig here that I love, says, remember, she's familiar with the law. She was Rachel Zane for years and fancies herself something of a legal expert. That's hilarious. Which, again, we're just playing the hypothetical game. If that's what happened, a big if, according to Lady C, if that's what happened, then all she would have to do is convince Dum Dum, hey, we're doing this to protect our kid, and he'd go right along with it. I don't think she has to convince Dum Dum of anything. I think whatever Meghan wants, Meghan gets, remember? And I don't think he ever grew out of it. All right, and then, in a very much look at us kind of way, they announced the birth of a baby boy on Instagram. Not very royal, right? Not the way that it had traditionally been done, but they're like, nope, we're going to do it. So they just put it up on Instagram on the account that they started the month before. Just a reminder, as Lady C points out, shortly after the baby's conception, Meghan flew to LA. Why is that? Because according to Lady C, she wanted to employ the, quote, best Instagrammers in the world. Is that a thing? The brief she gave them was straightforward enough. 1, I need you to create the world's #1 Instagram account for me. It needs to end up having more followers than any other Instagram account in the world. I'm laughing and thinking about real time, like how she cannot get followers for her American Riviera orchard and how much of a flop it's been, even with the bots and things. 2, I want to be bigger than Diana, Princess of Wales. 3, I need you to make me the most famous woman in the world. They're not magicians. How would that work? How do you do that? It's obviously not worked because, again, look at where they're at now. Irony of ironies that's not lost on me or any of you guys, I'm sure, is she actually had the opportunity to, I don't know about famous woman in the world, but to become kind of that, right? Had she just not been an a-hole, had they both not been an a-hole at every turn, had they played nice with the royal family, had they actually done what they said they were going to do and, I don't know, work on their causes and things, but nope, they can't do it. They have to make everything about themselves and continue to live full of hypocrisy and just general awfulness. So yeah, you missed your chance there, Dumbos. Offense to Dumbo the elephant. All right, I'm going to leave this here because we are pretty much done with chapter 8. We'll jump into chapter 9 when we return. And I'm excited to keep going with this book. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. It's just interesting to see their tactics and to see it with the view that we have today and to see they're still up to these same tricks. Let's silence anybody who disagrees with us. Let's continue to lie our faces off at every turn, and let's be the only ones that are allowed to speak out, nobody else. And again, continue to attack the royal family while clinging on to the titles and the perks. Guys, thank you so much for being here with me. I want you to know it means the world to me, and I appreciate you all so very much. I truly do. I can't wait to bring you more of this book. I hope you're enjoying this as much as me, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.